y'all. Let me say a little bit about who I am and what my work is, so I can kind of put what I want to share with you in a little bit of context. I've had an interest in men's health for probably since I was a little kid, and they said it's a boy. And part of that developed from, like it is with many people, our family, and my father was ill during my growing up and had a variety of problems. And I think I grew up kind of wondering what happened to my father and what had happened to me and how do I take care of myself. And I was kind of a sickly kid. I had a lot of illnesses as a kid. I had allergies, which I come and go as the whatever's growing grows. So as I think it's true for many of us, whatever challenges we have often translate into a passion for what we want to do. We start out trying to take care of ourselves, and then we find out, this is something I want to share with other people. So my thought tonight with you all was to share some things that I think are important about what I call gender medicine and men's health. And this concept in this field called gender medicine is rather new. And we all know men and women are different, and we've assumed that the differences in many cases medically and health-wise are fairly superficial. Women have certain women's problems that have to do with anatomy and physiology, and they call it bikini medicine. Whatever your bikini covers, that's medicine. And men have a different set of things that are tied to penises and prostates, and the kind of things we associate uniquely with men. But it turns out that we're different in many, many ways that are not obvious. And in 1998, a woman doctor named Marianne Legato made some interesting discoveries. She found that normally when we go to the doctor or we see media things, we're told about how to prevent heart attacks or what the symptoms of heart attacks are, because that's the leading cause of death for men and women is heart disease. And you all know the traditional warning signs, the pressure on the chest, the pain radiating down the left arm, and a number of symptoms. Well, what Dr. Legato found, she was a cardiologist, and she found that the symptoms for potential heart attack or heart disease were different in women than they were in men. Nobody had known that before. So what was happening is women would often go to the ER or go to the doctor with symptoms like nausea, symptoms like lower back pain, that nobody associated with heart disease. And what they found was then women were sent home often with, either no treatment or treatment for something else, and then they ended up back in the ER with a heart attack. And gradually over the years, she found out, there's some different symptoms that women have for heart attack. Now that's fairly well known. Not everybody knows that, but it's fairly well known. And Dr. Legato founded an institute for, she called it gender-specific medicine. Started out to look at women's issues, but then recognized that just as you look at women's issues for certain things, there are men's issues. And I want to just offer this quote that kind of captured what she found. What she said was that everywhere we look, the two sexes are startlingly and unexpectedly different, not only in their internal function, but in the way they experience illness. So I've been a proponent. I know Dr. Legato, we've spoken at different conferences together, and my particular interest is in the men's side of things, as hers was in the women's side of things. But part of what you're going to learn is not just going to help men and the men in your life or men that you know that you are concerned about, but what we learn about men also teaches us some things about women, just as what we learn about women teaches us some things about men. For instance, most women have some concern about breast cancer, and many women have been treated or are concerned, preventive things. Well, what we know is that the breast tissue and prostate tissue in men are very similar tissue, and often the same kinds of issues that would predispose a woman towards breast cancer would predispose a man towards prostate cancer. So things you would learn about breast cancer, men might say, oh, well, that has nothing to do with me. You know, I don't have breasts. Well, we know, for instance, that men can get breast cancer. People don't know that. You know, that men have the same, vestigial tissue in our chest and the nipple area that women have. So, it's a small amount of tissue, and it's obviously much less common in men, but men can get breast cancer in the same way, or chest cancer, breast cancer, in the same way that women do. And there's a whole lot of the funding that goes into breast cancer research and breast cancer treatment and marches for breast cancer, not so much for prostate cancer, but the death rate for men from prostate cancer is about the same number of people who die for breast cancer every year. So part of this whole field of gender medicine is to awaken us to take a better care of ourselves. And many of you have heard that there's a whole new movement in individualized medicine. The idea that someday you'd be able to go in and get genetically tested or get a very specific assay of your personal health, and you would then be able to get specific preventive measures that would relate to you individually, which would be wonderful, right? I mean, if we could know what our particular risks are for certain things that we could do to prevent, that would be very helpful. Well, what we found is that probably the most, when we're doing building things, call it shovel ready, they're ready to go, theory, practice, things that you could put into effect. Probably the most personalized medicine that you can begin with right now is gender medicine. What we know about women and what we know about men can help immediately large proportions of the population. So I was talking to a friend a couple of days ago in anticipation of my talk today. He said, you were so helpful to me. I gave a talk a year ago here, and he was at the talk a year ago. And I said, I made a challenge to the people that were there that relates to what I'm passionate about, that I was doing. And I said, there's been some research from the University of Michigan. I have a colleague there named Dr. Randall Nessig. And he said that when you look at risk factors for disease worldwide, you try to see what are the factors that predispose us towards certain disease. He said that the number one risk factor for early death and disease is simply being male. So think about that. All the men that you know, all the people in your life, all the men that are in the audience, that the single risk factor, if you could predict, are you going to die sooner? Are you going to have diseases? Being male is the highest risk factor, higher than any other single thing you could pick. To me, that's stunning. And what they found was that if you could simply lower the death rate of males down to the same level as females, so that isn't even major breakthroughs in medical science. If your husband could live as long as you do, if your male friends could live as long as female, he said we would save the lives of 375,000 men a year. 375,000 lives a year in the United States alone. And these statistics are generally true all over the world. I mean, so think of that. You know, if we could simply get men to know what women know about taking care of themselves, we could save the lives of 375,000 men a year. So think what it would be like, you know, with your friends. How many of you know who, you know, have men that died sooner and women are left and are widows? And I mean, we all know that, but think, you know, in our practical lives what that would mean. So I said, I want to save 1 million men's lives in the next 3 years. And that's what I've been doing through my work, through my writing, through my website. And he was challenged. He said, I want to be one of those guys whose lives get saved. And so he started doing some different things. And I want to offer you 8 practical things that people can do to make a difference in your lives as men and as people who care about men. So the first thing that we could do is to eliminate obesity. We all, you know, there's a lot of talk about, you know, losing weight. We know, you've seen the statistics, everybody knows 2/3 of us are overweight in the United States. We know that it's a risk factor for all kinds of problems. We know that as we get older, some of us don't know this, but as we get older, our metabolism slows down. Whatever we tend to, you know, whatever our level of our normal eating habits is not going to be good enough to keep our weight because our metabolism slows down. And as we get older, we tend to exercise less. We tend to, you know, eat better, particularly in those of us that are more affluent. So obesity. And what they've said is at the present rate that people in their 60s and older, 9 out of 10 men will be overweight. So 60 and older, as we get older, 9 out of 10 men and 7 out of 10 women. So it says to me a couple of things. It says, number one, this idea somehow that overweight is more a woman's issue. Certainly if you look at, you know, treatment programs, prevention programs, Weight Watchers, any program, they're predominantly female, or they're geared towards women. I went to Weight Watchers for quite a long time for myself, almost all women. A few men I could get to go, it didn't last very long because it didn't fit for them. So, number one take home I want to give you is that we can do something about taking off pounds. Secondly, that men are at higher risk than women. And the third, and probably the most important thing, I'm putting this at the first so that if anybody leaves beforehand or you want to get the best take home that I can give you, it's this, is that anybody who thinks about losing weight, which is most of us at some point in our lives, the belief is, and what's put out in the culture, is that it's an individual issue. If only I could, and you know, that we got all, you fill in the blank. If only I could not eat, if only I could, if only I could. Well, here's the truth of the matter. We will not lose weight, any of us individually, over any length of time by trying to do it as individuals. Won't happen. The way any of us stay a good weight or do healthy is that it has to be part of a community effort. That's why Avenues to Wellness is so important. It recognizes, you know, trying to get any individual. We can work hard individually, but everybody knows. You go to a potluck, and if everybody's eating the cake, I mean, I speak for myself, but maybe it's true for it, I'm going to want to eat the cake. There's actually studies that tell us that if your friends are overweight, you're more likely to be overweight. And listen to this. Even if your friends' friends, people you don't even know, you may have never seen, they live on the other part of the country, are overweight, you're going to be more likely to be overweight. So the take-home is, you can try it yourself, you can do it yourself, but it's got to be a family affair. It's got to be a community affair. Put the energy, if you have, into the kind of learning and teaching that we're doing at Avenues to Wellness, because that's going to make the difference. And it's the only thing that's going to make a difference. Any individual maybe will lose a few pounds and then gain it back, everybody knows. But together, a community that decides to lose weight, when all your friends are eating well and eating, the kind of goodies that are here, that's going to make a difference. So that's number one. Okay, so you can go home now and you got something that you can put into practice, and you can start eating the goodies from right now. Second one, this is for men particularly, alcohol and drugs, with an underline of alcohol. Alcohol is a difficult problem for many people. Not to say that women don't have alcohol problems, they do. But it's a particular problem for males at every age. When you look at young men, more problems with alcohol and drugs. As you get older, the problems increase, and there was a study that was done on aging males and how well men age. And one of the key factors for whether men do well is how is their relationship to alcohol. And the men that may have had no problem when they were young would start having a problem as they get older, or men who had a problem at a younger age and the problems continued. It wrecks families, we know that, and it wrecks marriages, we know that, it wrecks health. And I just want to say we need special programs, just as we need programs for weight loss that are male specific. I started a number of programs that were geared towards males, because the way you help men lose weight is different than the way you help women lose weight. I mean, for instance, I would go to Weight Watchers when I went, and if you go to any social gathering, what women do is they get in little clusters and talk, and they interact and they socialize. And a lot of what helps is the socialization. And if you go to anything, men don't tend to do that. Men, in the Weight Watcher or weight loss program, want to hear the facts. They want to know the detail. They want to just tell me what to do. I don't want to, I don't want to gab so much. I don't want to sit and talk to my friends. I don't want to. So that's why a lot of men don't come, because all the women are in little groups talking, and they come early and they talk, and they stay late and talk. And the men just want to go, give me the information. So, same thing with alcohol. What it takes to teach women how to stay in good relationship with their evening cocktail or their glass of beer or whatever, different than men. So that's number two. We need to teach men and women how to have different relationship, different kind of program for alcohol. Number three, we need to deal with depression in men. And we know, for instance, that the suicide rate for men is anywhere between 2 times higher than women, twice as high, up to 18 times as high, depending on age. So if you go back to males when they're 10 and 11 years old, and female girls when they're 10 or 11 years old, not many suicides, but the few suicides at early age, twice as many young males as young females. Then you get up to kind of our age group, 50s, in your 50s, the rate of suicide for males in their 50s is 5 times higher than females in their 50s. You get up into the 60s, 6 times higher. The 70s, 8 times higher. By the time you get 85 and older, which is the fastest growing demographic in the country, as there's more of us that are turning and living to be 85, the suicide rate for males is 18 times higher than it is for females. Think about that. I mean, if there was anything that affected women at 18 times the rate of men, you can bet there would be groups, organizations, uproar, but somehow we have this this belief that somehow it just, people don't know that. When I give those statistics, most people say, I didn't know that. I didn't know that it was that much. I knew men. But here's second point, take home, is that most of the worldwide studies on depression, which is correlated with suicide, says that women worldwide are depressed at twice the rate of males. That depression is viewed as more of a women's disease, women's problem. And then I put those two together. Well, if we know suicide and depression are related, but somehow depression is more prevalent in women, what's going on? Well, here's what I discovered. I did a research study. And what I found was that the way you determine if somebody's depressed, there's no blood test for it. You don't go to the doctor and they take blood and say, yeah, sure enough, you're depressed. They're symptoms. And they ask questions. Do you have this? Do you cry? Do you feel sad? Do you have problems with sleep? Do you sleep too much? Do you sleep too little? There's a whole series of questions that are in a standard depression scale. What I found was that the questions that I thought from my clinical practice related to men weren't on the depression scale, like irritability and anger and alcohol use. Didn't ask those questions. So if you don't ask the right questions, you don't get the right treatment. And if you don't get the right treatment, then you lose people who are acting out a symptom, but nobody recognizes it. So you see an irritable and angry male, and you say, "Oh, he's an old curmudgeon," or he's just like that, or but you don't say, "God, is he depressed? Does he need to see somebody? Does he need treatment? Does he need, to talk about why he's deeply troubled?" So, depression is something that we can treat. And interestingly, in the same way that heart disease was first viewed as a male illness until we started looking at what are the symptoms that are prevalent in women that may be different, depression is similar. I developed a male depression scale that's now being used worldwide that looks at the questions that maybe are more relevant to men so that we don't lose men. So that's number 3. So number 4, yeah.
I'm wondering if you do the relationship between men and women for suicide attempts. Is it equally extreme as 18 times?
No, it depends what you mean by a suicide attempt. So again, the studies indicated that women attempt suicide at higher rates, but they use things that are less lethal. So if a woman uses pills and a man uses a gun, he's more likely to die from his suicide attempt than a woman from hers. But then you ask, if a woman takes pills, was she really trying to die? Because it's not as likely you're going to die than if a guy uses a gun. So it still gets back to, are we losing people who really feel so hopeless they don't want to live? And you begin to ask, and I'll come to this at another point, why are men, as we get older, more likely to not want to live? Where you see, if we were graphing this, the suicide rate for women who are 40, 50, 60, 70 above, suicide rate is about the same. It doesn't increase as women age. But the suicide rate for men goes like this. That's why you get this 18 times higher for men in their 80s and 7 times higher in their 70s.
Janet, is it true also that older men who are single are more likely to commit suicide than those that are in a relationship?
Indeed, it is, and I'm going to speak to that point, but yes, and there's a reason why it seems like older men who are not in relationship, just like men in relationship, do better on all the health factors. years, and there's a lot of reasons why men in a relationship are going to be better off than single. So, depression, suicide. So number 4, men take more risks. This is across the board. You know, men take more risks at all stages of our lives. And what I've discovered is part of what we all can do is to acknowledge that it's okay not to put your life at risk. I mean, we honor men that make a living at that. You know, the police officers, the people that run into burning buildings are still predominantly male, even though, you know, women are getting into those lines of work. Soldiers and people in combat. But as a culture, we kind of want men to get out there and protect and serve. And there's a place for that, but there's also a downside of that, which is our husbands and our fathers and our brothers and our sons, you know, then see risk-taking as part of what it means to be manly. And women often are attracted to men who are risk-takers and ones that are willing to go out and, you know, be macho and do things. But over time, that can be dangerous. So my wife, she's told me over the years that one of the things she, you know, thinks is sexier than anything else about me and what I do is when I take care of myself. And she says, when you go and get your annual physical, that just really turns me on. And I can tell you, you know, men like that. You know, anything that turns a woman on, we're going to do more of. It's kind of part of our biology. And so anything we do that encourages men to take care of themselves, that women like that they encourage that they're attracted to men like that, as opposed to men that, you know, burn out and take the risk and burn out, is good. So that's number 4. Number 5, we need to learn to express our emotions. Women do that a lot better than us guys. And there's 2 parts of this. One is that in my practice as a counselor, invariably when I see couples, one of the issues will be, you know, a woman complaining that he doesn't tell me how he feels. He doesn't express his emotions. And yet when I talk to the men, they say things like, I express my emotions a lot, but she doesn't want to hear how I really feel. And for instance, what we know is that men have a lot of anger. I treat a lot of angry men in my practice. And part of the anger is they don't have a safe place where they can express their anger. And I talk to a lot of women that say, you know, I wanted him to tell me how he feels, but when he told me how angry he was, I didn't want to hear that. It scared me. And so what women and men need to learn is how we can accept the whole broad range of emotions. And there's many emotions that women have that men, I don't want to hear that. You know, I don't want you crying, it makes me feel uncomfortable. You know, we know that, right? So part of, for the male side of it, is allowing ourselves the full range of emotions. Sadness, anger, fear, frustration. I'm a counselor, as most of you know. I had a guy today who was in my office, and one of the things that he got in trouble with, he started drinking again after he'd been sober for a while. So that was a problem. And when we got to what the core of what got him drinking again was he was in a very stressed situation. He had a problem that he needed solving. His wife recognized that he had a problem, and she was texting him, call me, call me. And he read the text and ignored it because he didn't want to let his wife know how difficult the situation was. And he was going to be macho and solve it himself. So he went to get some help from another guy in a bar, because that's where the guy was. And while he was in the bar trying to get help to solve the problem, he ended up having a drink. And then he, the old tale of the alcohol, you know, the man takes a drink, and then the drink takes a drink, and then the drink takes the man. That's an AA saying. So, you know, the first drink we choose. Second drink, you're under the influence of alcohol, and in a sense, we're not in control. The drink takes a drink. And then the third is, you know, as in his case, he ended up all battered. He fell down and got injured, and the problem didn't get solved, and now he's back to having to. But the key was he knew that he was emotionally in trouble, but he had trouble allowing his wife to help him. So we need to work on that, guys. We need to be able to allow ourselves not only to be vulnerable to feel, but to let those close to us know how we're feeling. And as women, we need to also recognize that, you know, when we say we want a guy to tell us how they feel, women have to be willing to hear how we feel, you know, and be willing to hear it and embrace it, even if it makes you uncomfortable or scares you. Or, you know, I remember, I still have an image when I was working in a mental health clinic, and I was going through a hard time, and I got real emotional, and I started to cry, and one of the men embraced me, and one of the women, you know, saw me crying, and she made a comment, you know, and it was a derogatory comment about it. You know, it wasn't like wuss, but it was something like that. Something like, you know, I've never seen you cry. What's the matter with you? You know, it's like, and I'm sure, you know, if I, you know, and I later talked to her, it was like she had difficulty with emotions, and she had difficulty with men expressing feelings, even sadness, particularly if it was out of context, you know, in a professional setting where you wouldn't expect that. So we need to express feelings. Number 6, we need to honor what men do. Men tend to put a lot of our sense of self into what we do. Women tend to put more of their energy into who they are. So we say that men have, you know, more focus on doing, and women have more focus on being. That's a generalization. Obviously, we all have a lot of that, but often what you hear men's complaints is, I can't do anything right. And this fellow that I, you know, counseled today, I've seen he and his wife, and I've seen that he's trying to do this, he's trying to do that, and she's very critical. She's critical of what he does. And men, I can tell you, are so hungry for support for what I do, even if it's not what you know, I haven't hit the high mark of my doing, but anywhere along the way, if it's close, honor what men do. And men will do better if you appreciate what they do. They'll do worse if you appreciate not what they do, or you are down on what they do. And this is a general rule of thumb. People do better when they're rewarded than when they're punished. And men often feel punished by the women in their lives. So men need to be honored for what they do, and that ties into the time that we live in, where most of what men do in the world, their careers, their jobs, often is in jeopardy. Often we're at a time economically where more of us are losing our jobs, more of us are not able to work at what we want. Certainly when we retire, we get to an age where we're not working as much. There's a feeling of there's something missing in what I do. Who am I if I'm not doing and making a living? And so part of what I spend a lot of time teaching men is, you know, what you do in the world doesn't necessarily have to be limited by what your job is, because chances are you're going to come through a time where you're going to be out of work. And that can be because the economy goes down. It can be, you know, because marijuana gets legalized and so people aren't working in the same ways. It can be 100 different reasons why you're not doing what you used to do. And it can be you reach an age where you're retired. You know, you're happy to not be working. But we need to feel good about what we do, and we need to find ways to honor the doing part of men. So that's number 6. So number 7, it kind of ties back to what Doreen was saying about when men get older and our relationships end, often we're at higher risk of problems, whether it's suicide or whether it's depression or whether it's heart disease, higher rates for men who are single. Now here's the even more disturbing reality, is that as men get older, we lose friendships and we don't make new ones. And that's a significant difference from women, where if you do studies of women's relationships and you ask them, who do you go to when you have a problem? Who do you talk to? Who is your support? More often than not, it's not their husband, not their partner. They more often go to friends, women friends, more often to female relatives, more often to a larger social group. And as they get older, number one, they start with a larger group of support, a larger emotional support system. So even as you move away or you move to other places, you lose your contact, you're starting with a bigger group, so even when it shrinks, you still have a larger group. And you see this all over the communities, women who are older will still make new friends. And what you see with guys is, as we get older, our friends move away, the few that we had. Men in college maybe have a little group. As they get older, college guys move away, and our social network gets smaller and smaller, and we don't make new friends as easily. Why? There's a number of reasons why. One is we never made easy friendships when we were young. We didn't develop the skills for we made good, contacts. We made good, if we were in sports or we were in a work situation, we had, but emotional friends, people you can deeply talk to, not as easily. And also as we get older, men tend to, because of the increased depression, increased irritability, we tend to withdraw more. And so that adds to this kind of vicious cycle where we don't have the friends, we withdraw more. And then if your only friend is your wife, which is true for many, many men. When I have a group of, an audience of 1,000 people, and I say, of the men, how many of you have, a friend beyond your wife? Most men have their hands down. Ask women, how many of you have friends beyond your spouse? Almost all women have multiple friends, multiple contacts. Yeah. And men don't. So what I tell men, here's an example for me. I've been in a men's group that I'm meeting with starting Thursday, that I've been meeting with for 36 years. That's unusual. And they're guys that we've got, we're very close, as you can imagine, 36 years. We've been through a lot together. And I think and I know it's not a happenstance that I've also been happily married for 35 years. Carla, most of you know. And we both say that part of our success in our marriage has to do with that I have a social group, and she does too. She has a women's group, a couple of women's groups actually. I have a local men's group that I've been involved with for 5 or 6 years. But men, if there's one thing, so I said at the beginning, there's something I want you to take home about how we can socially take care of how we eat, and we're not going to be able to do it alone. Here's another take home, is that if you don't have social connections as a guy, as you get older, you're in trouble. You're at really high risk. So I encourage men in all kinds of ways to keep the social connections you have. They're important. Reach back out to old friends you may not have seen for a long time. Facebook people turn up, and Mike all the time. Oh man, I didn't remember you. And not only will it keep you from getting depressed, it'll keep you from, isolation. It'll keep you from relying so heavily on the woman in your life, so that, the pressure of a relationship when he is, very dependent on you because, you're his only friend. So I encourage men to reach beyond their relationship for broader contacts and social relations.
Good question. It seems as men get older, one of the most common social activities they have are the service clubs, especially in a small area.
Right.
Sometimes those service clubs are perhaps not as supportive of each member as they could be.
Right.
Do you see any way that can turn a little so there's more support and less competition or things like that?
Yeah, you're right. Social clubs are one of the places that men traditionally have found at least contact. And I speak at a lot of the social clubs, and I tell them this. They're often more oriented towards business. Either specifically, business, or there's a subcontext of, we're here to help each other and network and that kind of thing. But I say, man, get to know each other. There's more to life than our business, and you may be the first line of defense towards a guy who's starting to withdraw or starting to check out or get disconnected, and ask, how you doing, really, talk about what's going on in your life, share more personally. And I see that changing. I see the service clubs being more personal than they have been in the past. But I don't count on service clubs for men's emotional well-being. I've helped start in Willits, in this area, I probably started 10 men's groups over the years, and that are still going, and that men are, that are specifically geared towards social and emotional support beyond work situations. And I think when men recognize other men are in that need and want that, it becomes much more available. So the last point I want to make, and then we'll have some questions before we wrap up. This kind of ties all of these things together for me, which is stress. Because all of these different things often manifest itself in feeling overstressed. And what does that mean? I mean, it's a word that we all hear. We live in a stressed out world, we're overstressed. It means some very specific things for me, and specific ways that I tell men that, in fact, before the guy I told you about, I had a client earlier who's a high-powered attorney, and he's trying to let go of, working all the time. And so for him, we worked out an agreement, just happened today, is that he's going to leave work at 5 o'clock 4 days a week instead of 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 that he's been doing for 30 years. So one thing I tell guys, start disconnecting from whatever it is that is part of who you define yourself as, often work or service or job, and take time for yourself. And I remember one of the first steps I took years ago, and I built on it, is I took Friday off of work after. And to me, I can tell you, the idea of taking a day off of work was so, I couldn't imagine it. One, it maybe meant getting less money, which, at a time that I gotta work. It meant, I thought, taking energy away from people that needed me. I mean, people need me. How can I take a day off? And so it started for me was taking an hour off on Friday. Leaving at 4 o'clock rather than 5 o'clock. And then, wow, that wasn't so bad. Maybe I can do a little more of that. So whatever it takes, one is disconnecting from work, You know, I live in a beautiful social environment. I live in big trees out of town. Some of you know I'm selling my house and moving into town, but until we do, I get to be in nature. And I tell everybody, but men in particular, you need to be in nature. We're built to be in nature. Human beings walked, you know, for millions of years in nature. And so getting out in nature is stress reducing. And the final thing that I found reduces stress is having fun. You know, laughing. You know, just going, you know, laughing, being, you know, Diane's really good at that. She always has fun. And a final thing that I think is we need to move. Fun, if you can. I mean, some of you know I do Zumba, and I did that today. Actually, Tuesday is one of my Zumba days. And so moving your body, doing something physically fun, whether it's dancing, whether it's moving, whether it's yoga, whether it's some kind of fun physical activity, you know, helps us, you know, stay healthy. So those are my 8 specifics for you, and I'm happy to answer any more questions. We've got a few while I was talking. Yes, Diane?
Well, I hear kind of a common thread through all the points that you made, that underlying a lot of the difficulties that men have is it seems like men are shamed a lot in our culture from an early age, you know, like you said, when they have feelings, or and so they sort of are molded into these people who are just kind of, there's just no way that they're going to share how they're feeling, or
Right.
So.
Yep, that's absolutely true. And if you think about it, we live in a society that tends to value traditional male things, being aggressive, being out there, being strong, and we tend to downplay what is more feminine. And if you watch little boys growing up, and then little young men, and then older men, and all the way through, a lot of male identity is based on not being female, not doing female things. So if you think about, you know, what are the traditional kinds of things females are told you have to be, beautiful, quiet, curvy, you know, that are the same things we tell men they can't be. Men can't be soft, gentle, curvy, and the things that men are told they have to be, aggressive, you know, hairy, you know, strong, are the very things, right, we tell women you can't be. You can't be hairy, you can't be strong, you can't be aggressive, you can't be. So in the male case, there's a lot of shame about, you know, the range of being who you are. And so part of this, you're right, the thread that runs through this is really supporting ourselves to be who we really are, and allowing that whole broad range of being human and being male and being gendered and being happy to be, you know, male if you're male, and, you know, and female if you're female, and, you know, the lovely interchange that we have when, you know, men and women interact together.
I have kind of a general question. It seems to me that a few decades back there used to be a greater range of what was okay for men's behavior, and that men could be softer and do more housework. And there seems to be a bit of a backlash in the last 10 or 20 years. Would you agree with that?
I think that it's true. There is some backlash of what, you know, it's okay, but I think generally the trend has been expansive. Like at one of the places I write, I'll just put a little plug for my website while we're at that. I have a website and articles and things if you want to stay in touch with me. It's called menalive.com. So it's a free newsletter I put out. And one of the places beyond my own newsletter that I write for, a place called the Good Men Project. It's a very interesting environment that is geared towards men's issues. But interestingly, the company is run by a woman. So it's a very interesting dynamic between, it's focused on what does it mean to be a good man in the 21st century? What does it mean to be good? And what does it mean to be a man? And what does it mean to be a good man? And over the years, a woman has emerged as the head of the company. But what they are seeing, and they're one of the largest kind of media companies now that are out there, and they're exploring a whole range of what does it mean to be a man, and it's just really broadening the whole range of what's possible, and the dialogue they're having, I think this weekend in New York City, a gathering to explore those, and there'll probably be ones that'll happen on the West Coast as well. So yeah, I think both are happening. I think it's, in some areas it's kind of retrenched and it's not as open to be house husbands and less traditional males, and it's become more open and more possible for us to be who we are.
I think it's more open now because as I watch my grandchildren in their 20s and the men now are at a point where they change diapers, they can feed the baby, they can help with the housework, he's working, she's working. It becomes more of a partnership in a lot of the things. But you go back to when I was growing up in the 50s, there was a definite line. Mom did this, Mom did that, and Dad came home, the dinner was on the table, and it was a cut and dry kind of thing. We knew exactly where everybody worked and what their jobs were. Now it's kind of a loosening up so that, because both parents now work,
Right.
both parents share in the responsibility of the child rearing, to me, if they accept that, if the young people get to understand and accept that there isn't the stereotype, that it is a broad field, that we're all human beings and we all have to work together in order to make this planet a better place.
Exactly right. Yeah, I agree, and I see that with my 5 children and 15 grandchildren, and it is changing, and it's a great change. I mean,
Yes.
I see it just all over, and it's wonderful because it means that all of us are going to be more who we are, and all of us are going to live better and live longer, and we're going to create communities that are more joyful and more happy, and hopefully that'll ripple out. We have a world that is less in conflict and more able to, allow the healing that needs to happen everywhere.
I just, on another note of that, I recently is learning to knit and crochet, and I've been going to classes, and over the past, I'd say several months, there have been several men.
Mm-hmm.
And when a man comes into a knitting, crochet, or any kind of class like it, there's this kind of like, at first like, what are you doing here type of thing. And then when they either find out they're not gay, then it's even more. There's this, wow, you're doing this as a man. That is so cool. And then there's this energy that happens in the room that's just outrageous.
Yeah.
I mean, the women are going, that is so cool, and it gives them almost permission to do some of the other stuff they wouldn't normally do. It's just really neat to watch that.
Yeah, I'll end with just one little quick story to illustrate this. I mentioned I've been in a men's group that's been meeting now for 36 years, and years ago, there's 7 of us. So if you can picture 7 of us in Marin County at a kind of upscale restaurant, and there's 7 guys sitting at a table. And I'm imagining what people are looking at us and wondering what we're doing there, who we are, why 7 guys are sitting together at a table, and what are they talking about. And I can imagine people assuming they knew what guys talk about when they're just hanging out together. And, sports, women, sex, whatever. Well, what we were actually talking about, very deeply involved, was one of the men was in a relationship with the woman. And she didn't want to have children. And he did. And he was agonizing over, biological, I love this woman, but I want a child. And he was struggling with, am I going to leave the relationship to find a partner who wants to have a child? And probably if you asked 1,000 people, what are those guys talking about? Nobody would guess. One of the men is agonizing, and we're all, just almost in tears, with that dilemma that many women have, right? I can't have a child, I want a child, whatever, and it was a man. And he is now with a different woman. His child that they had shortly after is now 28 years old. And, he's a happy dad, and now a happy granddad. So, I'm happy to, to share the process of all of us being who we are, and may we all, in our own ways, help to heal ourselves, the men in our lives, and the planet that we all share. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.